Okay, so the admin features I want to point out. So this is what this little setting button, it's for admin utilities. So if I click this, we're just going to go here very briefly. This is center information. It's very general information about your organization. You should only have to go here once unless you move or something like that. Um, the only required fields are address and zip code. And some of you I know have confidential addresses, so you could put a PO box or whatever you need to enter here. Email address for the director or the primary contact. I will point out that if you are a HUD grantee, you definitely want to go to this page and make sure these two fields are complete. Your COC number and your geocode. They're not required because not all of you are getting HUD grants, but if you do, you want to make sure because the HUD reports pull data from these two fields, and your HUD report won't pass Sage unless it has that information in there. So that's all I'll say about the center information page. It's pretty self-explanatory. Personnel information. If you go here, this is a list of all your current and former personnel, including paid staff and volunteers. So if you have a new hire, you want to click this Add New Personnel button, and you want to enter their first name, last name. Up here, you'll see whether they're a paid staff or volunteer. By default, it will go to paid staff. So if they're a volunteer or an unpaid intern, you want to make sure you check the volunteer button. Personnel type is simply whether they provide direct service or not, or if they're a board member. Start date, and when they leave, when they resign, or they no longer work for your organization, you can update it with a termination date. And all these fields are optional if that's helpful for you. I know some providers use this to try and see if their staff demographics are representative of their survivor demographics. So that's one way you can use that information. So I'm going to go ahead and save. Sometimes I get a question about funding for staff, which I'll give a high-level overview of later. They'll say, I'm trying to add my new staff to my funding statement, but I don't see their name. Well, one, you want to make sure that this person was actually added as a personnel. And you also want to make sure that your funding date is equal to or later than this start date right here. If I'm trying to update my January 1st, 2024 funding statement, it is not going to let me add Jen Whitman because the funding statement is for January 1st and Jen didn't start until May 1st. So I need to add a funding date for May 1st, at least May 1st or later, before it will allow me to do that. The other point I want to make clear about this section is sometimes we get asked that staff drop-down menu that you'll see throughout InfoNet. Sometimes you might see names on there of people that left months, if not years ago. The way to clean that list up is to go in here, pick your staff member. Let's say Ruth Bader Ginsburg resigned a few years ago. You want to edit her personnel record by adding a termination date. And ideally, you know what date they last worked there. But if you don't, I would just recommend estimating, but making sure that whatever date you enter here is at least later than her last date working. So if you know this person left sometime in 2022, you could use December 31st, 2022. And once I save that edit, now when I enter services and I enter the staff name, this personnel will no longer appear on the drop-down menu. And you can search for different personnel. You can look for active staff. There's just different filters available to you. You can sort by demographics if you enter that information, type of staff, paid or volunteer. Another common question is, what if I have a volunteer that has become a paid staff? So I will demonstrate that. So let's pick a volunteer. I'm going to filter my search so that I only have volunteers. And I'm going to say, okay, this person, Cal Schaff, was a volunteer, but now we're going to make this person a paid staff member. So what I'm going to do is first edit their record. Now I cannot change a volunteer to a paid staff. So what I will do is edit their last name to volunteer. So I can visually see this is their volunteer record. I am also going to add a termination date for the last day they volunteered. I'm going to say their last day was April 30th, 2024. I'm going to save that. So now this record is removed from all my staff drop-down menus. I'm going to add a new personnel with the same name. And this one is going to be a paid staff. And I'll say their start date is 5/1/24. And now I have two records, one representing their paid staff, one representing their volunteer. We don't want them in the same record because sometimes you need to isolate one or the other. So that's why we have you do them as two separate records. Okay, so what's next on our admin? Okay, funding for staff. There is a whole 2-hour training on funding for staff, which I have a recording for. I haven't posted it on the website, but I'm happy to share that link with anybody who is interested, and I will post it on the public website. I keep forgetting to do that, but I at least want to explain to you what this means at a high level. So this is the tool in InfoNet that helps you report grant-specific information. Some funders, the city or DFSS is one of them. ICEJA is another one. We're required to do this for our VOCA and VAWA grants. And the coalitions also require some grant-specific information. And that means when you submit a report to them or when they run a report through InfoNet, they're not getting data for all your organization's work. They're only looking at clients served and services provided with the grant dollars that were part of this funding source. So this is the utility that tells InfoNet what to count under a certain grant. So I'm just going to point out what these are. We are now looking at a funding statement that started January 1st of 2024. That tells InfoNet that this is all the funding information that should be applied as of January 1st and onward. Anytime there's a change, I just want to add a new date. I will probably do that this July when grants tend to change. Right now, the staff showing is Bob Barker. It displays them alphabetically. So if you want to look at a different staff, you would simply select who that is. I'm going to select Carl Gruchot. The yellow are paid staff, whereas blue are volunteers. And I can see here Carl provides these 5 services and they are all fully funded. That's what this 100% indicates. And if I click this arrow here, I can see which grants pay for Carl's time when he provides this service. So this is simply telling me for every hour that Carl provides civil legal advocacy to clients, our VOCA grant from ICADV is going to pay for 3/4 of that hour, and DHS is going to pay for the other 25% of that hour. So it uses this section to display grant-specific data in your reports. And if you use this, I do recommend you go through the training because I know this is, I would say, is the most complicated part of InfoNet, but it's complicated because the grants we get always have strings attached and some fund this, but not this. And they change over time. That's why we always have to enter new funding dates when things change. But I provide a lot of TA on getting your funding statement correct. Okay, and finally, we're going to go to your own locally managed list. You remember when we were going through client intake and we got to the referral source, you could enter the specific agency that referred the survivor to your organization. I have control over what options are displayed in that list by clicking under Manage Lists and then Agencies. And these are all my entries. All the agencies I see in this list correspond to that agency drop-down menu. Another place we see this agency drop-down menu is the community services page. So if I go there and I enter a community service, it asks me which agency I provided the service at. And if I click this right here, it mirrors what I have in my local list. So I'm going to go back to that agency list and I'm going to add a new agency. I don't know if the network is in here already. It could be. It won't let you add the same one twice. So I'm just going to add that and save. Display order, I usually leave blank because it will display alphabetically by default. But if you wanted something at the top of the list, you do want to fill the display order in the lowest number compared to all the other records. Mostly this blank, but that is available if you find it helpful. Okay, so I just added the network. Let's go back to my client and the referral source section. And I'm going to just click referrals to quickly get me there. And agency name, I should now see the network in there. And there it is. Now, some of you might have a lot of agencies in here. Sometimes you have like, okay, this is a good example. See how I have Neapolitan and then Neapolitan Lighthouse? Those are really the same program, and it's just entered two different ways. So I highly recommend that when you are working with your own lookup list that you scroll down and make sure you're not entering something that's already there, just written in a slightly different way. What I can do to help clean that up, I'm gonna open up this list a little so I can see more records on the same page. Probably gonna have to scroll to the next page. Okay, so see, I have Neapolitan and Neapolitan Lighthouse. Let's say I want to get rid of this one, Neapolitan. I'm first going to try and delete it. The problem is there may be records linked to this agency, so I'm going to save. I'm going to try and delete it, and we'll see what happens. It's warning me. Yes, I definitely want to delete it. I don't know why it's not doing anything. Maybe it's just slow. So let me give you a preview. Hopefully it will do this shortly. But if there are any records tied to this Neapolitan that I'm trying to delete right now, it won't let me delete it because there's records tied to it. And there's my warning. It says I can't delete it because there are other records that reference it in the system. Okay, well, what's the next best thing I can do? I'll go down to the same record, and instead of deleting it, I am going to edit. And this is my active checkbox. If I scroll up, the heading of this column is active. So all I need to do is uncheck the is active box and then save it again. And now I'm removing it from the drop-down menu. It'll prevent any other records from being selected or linked to that particular wording of Neapolitan. So if I go back to my referral source on this client we entered earlier. And if I scroll down, I now see that I have Neapolitan Lighthouse, but Neapolitan is gone. And then when you have time, I know how busy you are. You can maybe try to find that Neapolitan record and edit it to Neapolitan Lighthouse. I have helped provided TA to different programs so for in cleaning up their data. So that's definitely something you can work on as time allows. So there are 3 lookup lists. We just went over the agency lookup list. The other ones I'm not going to go over again because they work the same way, but this one is for your funding sources. There are some read-only statewide funding sources like DHS, ICADV. You'll see your city grant funding sources on there. Those are uneditable because many of you use them. But maybe you're getting a grant from a local county board or United Way, and you want to add your own funding source. You can do that with this list. You just want to add it here. I'm just making this up. You can enter an end date if you know this grant only goes to a certain time period. So I'll say this ends 12/31/24. Display order is the same. And now when I am working in my funding statement, I can link staff that are supported in part or wholly with that grant. The final locally controlled list is your other staff activities. And this is just a way for you to track anything you want in InfoNet that's helpful to you. You'll see when we enter services in InfoNet, yes, we have standardized service categories for counseling and advocacy. There's community services for the prevention work, the outreach you do, systems advocacy. But let's say you want to track something different that's not in there. Maybe it's fundraising. Maybe it's training that you're sitting in, like right now, because InfoNet has categories for when you provide training, but not when you receive. And maybe if you want to track that, you would create an activity called InfoNet training or training received, however broad you want to make it. I've seen this used for administrative work, strategic planning. It's a way to track things that you all do that are very important, but you want to monitor how much time your staff are spending on this work. So you can create your own activities. This is, you can see my training attendees over the years have been pretty creative in coming up with their own types of activities they like to track. And self-care is a big thing with all of us. So maybe you want to even track that. I don't know, but this is something to use for whatever you find helpful. And okay, so that concludes the administrative section.